motion.
Open this debate under your chairship, Dr. Alan Khan. I do so with a sense of déjà vu, because we've been here before on the anniversary last year and in debates on the Cumberledge Review before that. The issue of redress for these victims is a well-trodden road. I'd like to start by paying tribute to the many individuals who've campaigned tirelessly for justice, change, and to prevent their experience from happening to others. I also wish to thank the Patient Safety Commissioner, Professor Henrietta Hughes, for the work she put into her report. And I know she's with us in the gallery today, along with many campaigners.
Hear, hear.
I'd also like to put on the record my thanks to Baroness Cumberledge before this report for the exceptional work she did, giving voice to victims during the 2 years she led the Cumberledge Review. And I'd like to pay tribute to her for her continuing commitment to those victims since. We're here today because 2 years on from its publication, the government has still not published an official response to the Hughes report. There's been no redress scheme implemented and no timeline announced. We have repeatedly been told the recommendations are being carefully considered. Yet there's no date, no framework, and no mechanism for justice in place. Just to be clear, the Patient Safety Commissioner didn't decide one day to write this report. She was asked to pull this report together and to look at options for redress for those harmed by valproate and pelvic mesh. This was a report commissioned by the Department for Health and Social Care in late 2022. In her foreword to the report, Professor Hughes was clear that in accepting the commission, and I quote, "The case for redress had already been made by the first Do No Harm review, so my report would primarily focus on how to provide redress rather than why." Secondly, patients must not be subjected to an emotional rollercoaster, meaning that commissioning this work would inevitably raise expectations and that it would be profoundly unfair to do so if the government had no intention of providing redress. I will give way.
I thank the member for giving way and for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber today. I brought this debate about the Cumberledge report forward 18 months ago, and I've said at the time I hoped it would be the last time we would debate this, yet here we are again. Would she agree with me that it's the emotional impact that this has had on the women involved that is hugely important? I was approached by a number of constituents of my constituency of Harlow, including Debbie, who joined me when I had my debate. And that is why it's so important that the implementations of this review are put forward.
I thank him for his intervention. The emotional toll is significant. It's a daily struggle for some of them, and they are battling a system. But right there at the outset, at the start of the report, the Patient Safety Commissioner was clear that she should not be asked to undertake a look at options for redress for those harmed by valproate and mesh if there was no real intention or desire in the department to make a redress scheme a reality. Why commission this report and raise the expectations of thousands of families if there was never any intention to follow through on the recommendations? As colleagues know, 30,000 women and children have been harmed through no fault of their own from valproate and pelvic mesh. They are paying the price of the failure to keep them and their children safe with immense pain, agony, fear and guilt. 5 years on from the Cumberledge report and 2 years after the Hughes report, the government has still not confirmed plans to provide financial redress. Financial redress is unfinished business, and it is past time that the government responded. Let's not forget that of those affected by valproate and mesh, 85% report not being able to work. 73% report that their finance has suffered as a result. 91% report their mental health and well-being adversely affected, as the Honourable Member just referenced, and 88% report that their relationships have been negatively impacted. Let me unpack that for a second. That's my constituent Carol, a doctor by training who was forced to take long-term sick leave and see her health and her career deteriorate. That's the valproate families who, on top of the physical effects, face the nightmare of CAMS and PIP reassessments every few years, having to explain what fetal valproate spectrum disorder is to every clinician they encounter because it isn't widely understood. It's the heartbreaking situation one victim shared with me, in tears, of the devastating impact mesh has had on her ability to be intimate with the love of her life. The lack of a clear timeline of action by the same slow, dismissive system that harmed patients is further compounding their physical and mental pain.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend who's making a powerful speech. Would she agree with me that whilst the financial redress is an incredibly important part of the Hughes report, it also lays out other important elements, for example in healthcare and SEND? My constituent Deborah has 2 sons. It was only when the second son went to school that the school realised there might be something due to her taking of sodium valproate that was affecting both boys. She had to battle against the system and is now having to drive the elder son to university because, suffering from autism, he is unable to make that journey using public transport. So would she agree with me that those recommendations are also an incredibly important part of the Hughes report?
I do agree with him for his intervention. I will give way.
To add to that, this is about so many different aspects of support, really, and one of the recommendations in the Hughes report that's been drawn to my attention is the one on housing, which I think is also such a crucial point. My constituent was prescribed sodium valproate during pregnancy, and her son, who's now 25, lives with fetal valproate syndrome and requires 24/7 support and will do for the rest of his life. But my constituent said is that even quite relatively modest adjustments to their home and some specialist equipment could make a real difference, but she's not found any way of getting funding for that. So does the member agree that housing is a really important area for us to be looking at as well?
For raising it today. I know that many colleagues in this room have been championing this cause for years. There's a string of parliamentary questions going back to the launch of the report 2 years ago asking for progress updates. The Patient Safety Commissioner herself used her statutory powers for the first time in October last year to ask for more detailed answers from the Department of Health. The responses were published in November, and just a few weeks ago in January. We now know that there have been meetings and roundtables and briefings and no progress on redress. If I'm reading between the lines of these responses correctly, it's the dead hand of the Treasury that is the issue. Before I conclude, I wish to mention Carol. I've shared Carol's story before, and I return to it today because it lays bare the cost of years of government inaction. When I first met her online, I hope she won't mind my saying this, she was a physical wreck. She needed assistance to get a visa to the US during the pandemic for urgent medical treatment following a hysterectomy and rectopexy using surgical mesh, a procedure that was intended to resolve her pelvic organ prolapse instead caused devastating harm. She was left with a serious autoimmune disease, struggling to walk and unable to live her daily life. Her prognosis was bleak, and she needed to have the mesh urgently removed. That is a treatment that was not available to her on the NHS. And while suffering from chronic pain and with limited mobility, Carol accessed private treatment in the United States. A combination of determination, medical knowledge, and personal resources allowed her to do so. And Carol is now mesh-free following a successful surgery. She attempted to pursue a clinical negligence claim against the surgeons who harmed her. Multiple law firms declined to act because those same surgeons were advising firms on other cases. These conflicts of interest blocked Carol's access to justice. In one case, the same surgeon who caused Carol life-changing harm acted as an expert witness in an unrelated mesh case. The judge in that case found that this surgeon selectively chose evidence supportive of the defence failing to provide balanced evidence and failing in his duty to the court. That finding is on the record. Such conflicts are not isolated. Conflicts of interest and the closing of ranks amongst professionals remain a structural barrier to justice for victims. And that right there is just one of the reasons why an independent redress scheme is long overdue. The current system is failing these women, failing these children, and failing these families. So I have two questions for the Minister. May I ask her what conversations she and her department and her officials are having with the Treasury in Downing Street to make redress a reality for these victims? And will she meet with some of the families affected and hear directly from them why redress is so important to them? Thank you, Chair.
It's an incredibly important topic, and I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered the second anniversary of the Hughes report. Because there are so many members wanting to get in, I would be very grateful if you could try and stick to 4 minutes each, approximately, to allow everyone to get a say. I'd like to call Warinda Jas.
Thank you, Dr. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship again. I want to thank the Honourable Member of Chesham and Amersham for bringing this issue before the House today, and I also want to record my thanks to the Member for Washington and Gateshead South for her tireless commitment to this campaign and for her leadership in chairing the First Do No Harm APPG. Like many members here today, I was also present here a year ago when we debated the first anniversary of the Hughes report. Sadly, although it's been 2 years since the publication of this report, the government has still not responded to the Hughes report, with justice still not having been delivered for the many women impacted by pelvic mesh and sodium valproate. Within the very first paragraph of her report, Dr. Henrietta Hughes makes it clear that the report must lead to government action. We often hear that justice delayed is justice denied, and yet we continue to deny justice to these women who have suffered. Redress must be delivered, and it must be delivered swiftly. The Hughes report recommends a two-stage non-adversarial redress scheme to provide both financial and non-financial support to these women who suffered avoidable harm due to pelvic mesh and sodium valproate. Although financial compensation is of course vital, a two-stage scheme would involve a quick initial payment followed by a more tailored scheme for payment of compensation. But just as important is access to appropriate support, including specialist healthcare, and a formal acknowledgement with an apology of the harm endured by these women. Dr. Hughes has laid out in detail how such a scheme can be implemented, and it is for this government now to act and put this scheme into effect as soon as possible. Alongside delivering justice for the victims of the mesh and sodium valproate scandals, I urge the Minister and her department to commit to doing everything possible to prevent future scandals of this sort and to better protect our constituents and our communities. I also welcome the work of campaign groups like Sling the Mesh, and I would urge the government to consider making yellow card reporting mandatory so that potentially harmful products can be identified sooner and action taken before damage is done. Dr. Alan Khan, I have a particular interest in this debate because although I have had constituents who have been affected before becoming an MP, I worked as a solicitor, specialising in representing women who were given these plastic polypropylene mesh implants for vaginal mesh surgery as a quick fix to treat pelvic organ prolapse and stress urinary incontinence without being properly advised by the doctors who gave that treatment. All these women did was to trust a medical professional, as we all would do, but who told them that they were receiving the gold standard of care. This mesh then eroded, cut through vaginal tissue, causing chronic pain, loss of mobility, sexual dysfunction, often resulting in relationship breakdown, with many then being unable to continue working and suffering with life-changing injuries. Dr. Alan Khan, their lives were ruined. I was always acutely aware when pursuing legal claims for compensation for these women that compensation and legal costs would ultimately fall on the NHS. A compensation scheme, as recommended by the Hughes report, would save the excessive costs of litigation that the NHS would have to pay out, money that can then be used for treatment of patients. I would also like the government to consider alternative approaches, such as an insurance-style levy paid by companies when they bring out new products to the market, which would create a dedicated fund for future claims, protecting our vital NHS resources whilst also incentivising manufacturers to ensure that their products are of the highest standards of safety. Dr. Alim Khan, we cannot leave these women in limbo, waiting to receive the redress that they so clearly deserve. So I say to the Minister, please respond to the Hughes report, enact Dr. Hughes's recommendation and ensure that justice can finally be delivered for these women.
Yeah. Julian Lewis.
Thank you. I will try to add something new to the excellent start to this debate by both originating speakers who showed a great command of the overall situation. And I shall do that by quoting my constituent Emma, who was in touch with me yesterday after learning that this debate was going to take place. To summarise very briefly her concerns, she set it out in the following way, and I quote, "In the main, the point is that so many have been injured, left on NHS waiting lists, paying for prescriptions and transport to and from appointments, not being able to work or restricted working hours, limited access to PIP, very little support for those who had mortgages due to the benefit system not supporting mortgage costs, and loss of pension contributions, as none of us is getting any younger." This lady is exceptionally strong. Despite the injuries that she suffered personally, she has been a rock and a leader to other mesh-injured women in or near my constituency. I hold her in the highest esteem. In fact, I salute her courage. I believe that what she has to say is an argument that, in a sense, has already been won. The Cumberledge report did win that argument, and it was the Hughes report that wanted to recommend what should happen next. And I'm delighted to see Henrietta Hughes here and seemingly acknowledging that I'm right about that difference between the two reports. Let me very briefly quote from her admirably concise list of 10 recommendations. Recommendation 1, the government has responsibility to create an ex gratia redress scheme providing financial and non-financial redress for those harmed by valproate and pelvic mesh. The scheme should be based on the principles of restorative practice and be co-designed with harmed patients. Recommendation 3, the government should create a two-stage financial redress scheme comprising an interim scheme and a main scheme. Recommendation 4, the interim scheme should award directly harmed patients a fixed sum by way of financial redress. These payments should start during 2025. Recommendation 8, both the interim scheme and the main scheme should be administered by an independent body which commands the confidence of patients. Now, what's the point of having an interim scheme? The point of an interim scheme is to recognise that there will be tremendous complexity in individual cases, but at least you get a minimum of help. I think the figure of £25,000 has been suggested in the case of mesh-injured ladies. You get a significant amount of help straight away, while the more complex calculations can be done later. And yet, the very point of the interim scheme being that we can do this quickly and work on the harder parts subsequently, has seen no progress. And what does this remind you of, Dr. Alim Khan? Because it reminds me of the post office. It reminds me of the infected blood scandal. And what do all those things have in common? A very large number of people who have been injured in some way or another, physically, or their characters or their freedom damaged, or often beyond repair, and who are owed very large sums of money by way either of redress or compensation. And we know what happens in the end. In the end, there is enough public protest to ensure that action takes place. And I hope that the level of public awareness is not less for this cause than it is for other similar scandals, because all the victims were women. That would be even more disgraceful than the fact that this all happened in the first place.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under you, and I wish to thank the member for Chesham and Amersham for bringing this debate. Now, in rising on behalf of my constituents who have written to me on this topic, I want to begin my contribution by quoting the Patient Safety Commissioner for England, Professor Hughes, in her comments to the BBC when her report was released 2 years ago. She said, "These families weren't listened to by a system that really turned its back and fobbed them off with information which led to not only them being harmed, but thousands of others being harmed." The Hughes report has still not received a proper response from either the Conservative government or the current Labour government. That is the key. This is deeply disappointing and a massive letdown to all those women and children that have been affected by this scandal. I appreciate this is an important issue and it does warrant due process, but this has been a 2-year wait for a response to a report, not to mention that the wait for families affected has been so much longer. Now, while the Patient Safety Commissioner's remit extends to England only, this is a UK-wide issue. The regulation of human medicines and medicinal products is reserved. The report said that the Department of Health and Social Care should engage with devolved governments on the issue of where and how the two-stage redress approach should apply across the UK. The UK government has indicated these conversations are taking place. This is encouraging, and I hope this continues. But in Scotland, we've been disappointed by this government more than once. The well-worn saying applies: justice delayed is justice denied. This government promised change. Here is a case in point. The unreserved apology offered by the last government in July 2021 was welcome, as was the invitation in December 2022, and I quote, to look at what a potential redress scheme could look like. But that was more than 3 years ago. Of course, with the infected blood scandal and the Post Office Horizon scandal, this government rightly deserves praise for acting to redress the problem and offer compensation, albeit slowly in some cases. But please don't add this situation to that of the WASPI women, the nuclear test veterans and others, where a negligent approach has been taken by successive governments. In summary, Madam Chair, I'm speaking up on behalf of my constituents primarily. We need urgent action on this report and a proper system of redress for the countless families affected by this scandal. Please, let us get on with addressing recommendation 4 of the Hughes report without delay, and I hope the Minister will respond to that in a response.
Well done, excellent.
Daniel Francis.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Chesham and Amersham for securing the debate. Like last year, I spoke during that debate where I raised the experience of my constituents, Paula and Gillian, who'd experienced the impact of having pelvic mesh fitted. Unfortunately, not much has changed since then, and Paula's told me she's still living with the devastation that pelvic mesh has had in her life. She'd had that mesh implanted in 2012 and experienced painful bladder stones between 2020 and 23, which were attached to mesh. And she finally had surgery to remove the bladder stone last year, during which the mesh had been found to have completely eroded into her bladder, and the bladder stone was found to be the size of a 3-centimetre stone. She will now need further surgery to remove the remainder of that mesh, and will need to undergo a further recovery period. And as we've heard, that story is like many, many other stories we've heard. Now, I will say, similar to what I said last year on the issue of valproate, firstly, I'd like to thank Emma and Janet and those campaigners who are here today, who do so much in that area. And if you look at what the Epilepsy Research Institute says in regard to the Hughes report, they continue to ask for certain issues from the government, particularly allocating dedicated ring-fence funding for epilepsy research into those drugs and ensuring that regulatory bodies act swiftly on those safety concerns and that pregnant women with epilepsy have access to the best possible information and care. Now, I will take this down a slightly different path because, as some members know, my wife has epilepsy, one of my daughters has epilepsy, and I saw firsthand, when we tried to conceive, the issues that women have when they have to come off of valproate. My wife was seizure-free for 12 years, and her life was turned upside down, quite frankly. She started having seizures again. Those seizures included falling all the way down the stairs, included falling into a bathroom cabinet and having it attached to her head that I had to try and disengage her from, having a seizure in the bath where I had to resuscitate her on the bathroom floor, and having to surrender her driving licence. And at one stage, thinking she would never go back to her job of teaching, which she has very successfully gone back to. But those many, many years, and she will be 3 years seizure-free this year, mainly because she has gone back onto valproate. But those many, many years when she had seizures and those issues that she had show you those issues that continue and why that research is desperately needed for drugs that are needed to control epilepsy. Because, unfortunately, valproate is the only drug for many people that does allow them to lead a normal life. And I've seen that. The rules are there for a good reason. But my daughter, who's 12, has no mental capacity, as, again, members may know. And yet she's had to come off of valproate because of the rules that there are now there. And so we do need to understand those issues and that wider issue. Because for many people, as I say, valproate is the drug they need and the drug that is needed to support them. And that's no disrespect, Emma and Janet have heard this, for the work they do and supporting those people who've been so desperately impacted by valproate and the impact that's had on their children and those families' lives. So I do welcome those noises that we've heard recently, that we may hear some forthcoming updates from the department. But I do say, on behalf of my constituents and that wider community, that we do need to be provided with concrete measures to see that implementation of financial and non-financial redress. And I would welcome the Minister's comments on that matter later. Thank you, Dr. Rizzo-Anakan.
Adam.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. It's a real honour to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Chesham and Amersham for this valuable and vital debate. But before I begin, I really want to pay tribute to all the families who have suffered as a result of a miscarriage of any form of justice, whether in this case we're talking about sodium valproate or pelvic mesh. But I'm especially grateful to my constituent, Emma Friedman, and really salute her and her son, Andy, for first of all educating me on this issue, particularly about sodium valproate, but for their real strength and perseverance and unwavering commitment to justice. It shouldn't really be so hard, but unfortunately it is. As the Right Honourable Member for New Forest East mentioned, we've been here before. We've seen this all before. 30,000 people were infected and affected in the contaminated blood scandal in the 70s and 80s. 700 hard-working postmasters and postmistresses were falsely prosecuted and their lives destroyed, and billions of pounds were wasted on unusable PPE during a national emergency. And now, mainly, I'm going to speak about sodium valproate. Sodium valproate is an effective drug. It was developed in 1962. It has transformed the lives of countless people with epilepsy and bipolar disorders. But it's always been known to cause serious harm when taken during pregnancy. The risks are stark. Around 30 to 40% of children are exposed in the womb, develop neurodevelopmental disorders, and approximately 10% suffer serious congenital malformations, including spina bifida, cleft lips, and other lifelong disabilities. The sadness is it's estimated that 20,000 children in the UK have been affected. The concern is this, that there's evidence that suggests that doctors were always aware of these risks from the early years and the drugs and what effect that the drugs had. Yet in the 1970s, the Committee on the Safety of Medicines made this extraordinary decision that fully warning women may cause, according to the minutes, fruitless anxiety. So the warnings were not given. And the fact that this decision was made after the thalidomide scandal makes it all the more shocking. Some parents report that they were warned about the possible side effects to themselves, but they were never warned about it to their unborn babies. And that pattern appears to have been repeated again and again. Clear warnings did not, in fact, emerge till the late 1990s and were only strengthened around 2010. when the first dual GP toolkit was published only as late as 2015, but it still did not mandate direct, informed conversation with patients. So the GPs didn't simply have to tell patients. As been mentioned already before, women were often dismissed. There was never any long-term study conducted, and even today, some women are only discovering through their own research why their 30 or 35-year-old child lives with a disability linked to valproate. This is truly shocking. And it's still ongoing. This is not history. The Independent Medicine and Medical Device Safety Review, the Cumberledge report published first, Do No Harm in 2020, it concluded that women had been misled and ill-informed, and it recommended an independent redress agency, specifically compensation scheme for those harmed by sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. The government, unfortunately, did not accept those recommendations. In December 2022, the Patient Safety Commissioner was asked to explore options, and on 7th of February 2024, the Hughes report clearly called for an independent two-stage scheme providing both financial and non-financial compensation. The government has yet to respond. Meanwhile, families continue to struggle. In many cases, it is the mother who may herself still be suffering with epilepsy is the primary carer of a disabled child. Many families are living in difficult socio-economic conditions, and they are barely surviving. And we can't even begin to imagine, Madam Chair, the emotional toll and the feeling of guilt that many parents talk about. And many feel it is their fault. We just can't imagine their mental anguish.
Will the member give way?
I will do. Thank you.
I thank the member for giving way, and I also want to pay tribute to people who have brought this issue so far. Would you also agree with me that that emotional toll that you talk about is really living large in the lives of those families, and that they deserve at the absolute least an apology and redress?
I thank the Honourable Member, and yes, that's the least that we can do. Yes, sodium valproate is effective, as powerfully demonstrated by my Honourable Member. Women must not abruptly stop taking this medication, as that can be seriously dangerous. This is a serious failure of communication between regulators, GPs, specialists, fertility clinics and pharmacists. We must modernise the safety system, better data sharing, digital alerts, clear packaging warnings, and above all, mandatory one-to-one consultations so that every woman of childbearing age understands the risks and the alternatives. Mistakes will always occur in medicine, but how quickly we acknowledge them, compensate those harmed, and learn from them is the true mark of a progressive society. The current Health Secretary, when in opposition in February 2024, expressed frustration how slowly justice was progressing. Those words now must be matched with action.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. It's a pleasure to serve you today under your chairship. And I also want to thank the member for Chesham and Amersham for bringing this really important debate. I'm going to focus today, Dr. Alan Khan, on sodium valproate, which was prescribed for decades without proper warnings as to the effect on unborn children. And as a result, these children were harmed, and despite multiple government-commissioned reports, families are still waiting for accountability and redress. 2 years on from the Hughes report, that delay can no longer be justified. So sodium valproate is a medicine that's used for epilepsy and bipolar disorder, and it really is a very effective medicine for many. But if you take it whilst pregnant, it can cause serious harm. And those harms include major physical birth defects, developmental delays, learning disabilities, and a significantly increased risk of autism. Many of the children affected here will need lifelong care. For years, women and prescribers were not given clear or adequate information about these risks, despite them being known about. Even after the effects were more widely known, prescriptions continued without proper safeguards in place. And at least 7,000 children have been affected by this medicine since it came onto the market in 1973. But the real number is quite likely very much higher because of the lack of awareness around sodium valproate spectrum disorder. Now, one of my constituents, Nicola, was one of the many women affected. Her children were profoundly harmed by exposure during pregnancy. And like so many others, Nicola trusted her doctor. She followed proper medical advice, and she was badly let down. She's explained to me just how immense the impact has been on her and her children, and of course how much difference compensation would make to her kids' lives. I'll happily give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a passionate case for her constituent. And my constituent Jill has told me how she has suffered for around 11 years as a result of the pelvic mesh scandal. She's a member of the Sling the Mesh group. And does my honourable friend agree with me that whether it's sodium valproate or whether it is pelvic mesh, it is groups like this who deserve to be listened to and pay tribute to for campaigning for these courageous women?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and he's absolutely right. And the thing is, this scandal is following a pattern that we've seen far too many times before. Early warnings ignored, information withheld or downplayed, measures to protect people not effectively enacted, public bodies closing ranks rather than being open and honest when things go wrong. Dr. Alan Khan, I've done a lot of work on maternity safety, and I have seen these patterns again and again. The parallels are really clear. And had concerns been properly addressed at the outset, so much harm could have been avoided. So many more children would not have been born with these lifelong preventable conditions. And their families have been waiting far too long. There was initial recommendations for redress 6 years ago in the Cumberledge Review, but of course the previous government failed to act. Through the Hughes report, we've got an even more comprehensive examination of what needs to be done to support these families. Yet they're no closer to getting even a formal response on the Hughes report. And this constant delay simply increases the cost, delays support, and it builds up ill will with the families affected. They've spent their lives already fighting for their kids. So I urge the government to provide an interim payment for these families. We know it's possible. Dr. Hughes has outlined how to do that in this case. We've seen it in the infected blood scandal. But the main question for the Minister today is, when will we get a full response to the Hughes report? When will we actually see some action? Dr. Alan Khan, like so many of my colleagues, I want to pay tribute to Emma and Janet from InFact, who are here today. Their children were affected by sodium valproate, and they have been tireless campaigners. I've known them for many years now, tireless campaigners for compensation for the families affected. And they've been absolutely invaluable about raising awareness about fetal sodium valproate spectrum disorder. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to the member for Lancaster and Wyre, who's worked with InFact for many years on this. She's been a staunch advocate for their campaign. But despite all their hard work, progress from the government side seems to have stalled yet again, and families are left waiting. We know that things go wrong in medicine. We know that all drugs have side effects, but when that harm is caused, when that harm was preventable, and when the state failed to act on warnings, the government must step up. We should do what we should have done years ago and give justice and support to the families who've already paid a really heavy price for our failings.
I'd like to remind people that it is actually discourteous to not attend for the opening speeches and then make interventions, because as a result of that, it means that people that have sat here from the start, who will be here till the end, now have a shorter time limit imposed on them. Because of the number of members who have indicated their wish to speak in the debate, with the authority of the Chairman of Ways and Means, I'm imposing a time limit on backbench speeches of 3.5 minutes to take effect from now. I'd like to call Jim Shannon.
Chair, a real pleasure to serve under your chairship. Big thank you to the Honourable Lady for Chesham and Amersham for giving us the opportunity to contribute to this and for giving me an opportunity to mention the Northern Ireland and what's happening there. Pleasure to see the Minister in her place, and I thank her for all that she does. Well, this report was for England only. The ripple effect is UK-wide, and as of February 26, Northern Ireland victims remain in limbo. The Northern Ireland Department of Health has stated its approach will be informed by the UK Government right here, final position, which has not yet been determined. So my request to the Minister will be, because nothing has been done here, then nothing happens in Northern Ireland. So we're being affected by that. And I know the Minister is always very, very responsible. Could I ask her, please, to give us some indication of the timescale? Patients continue to contact me and also MLAs in an attempt to see the adoption of the report's recommendation, and the phrasing is that families feel abandoned by the lack of progress on financial compensation. I can understand that the Department of Health NIs needs guidance with this place. The UK as a whole is waiting to see what implementation and indeed redress will actually look like. While financial payments are stalled, some progress has been made on the non-financial report, the continued operation of specialist mesh centres and improved clinical guidelines for prescribing valproate, and this is welcome, but to be put simply, it's not enough. Very quickly, please.
Thank the honourable member for giving way.
women have been left in lifelong pain and children have been born with preventable disabilities, families, financial, emotional stress, with many women actually having lost their jobs, their homes and even their marriages. Would you agree with me that yes, financial and non-financial is important, but also that preventing this in the future, it's important that the dots are joined up early and that early warning signs are not buried in bureaucracy? Would you agree with me that that's an important issue?
Intervention. A specially accredited unit operates at Belfast City Hospital, featuring a multidisciplinary team to treat mesh-related problems. There's also the option that if complex removal surgery is required, that can be performed locally. So we're doing our best in Northern Ireland to address the issue. Whilst the unit is operation, advocacy groups like Sling the Mesh NI have expressed concerns regarding the conflict of interest in requiring the original implanting surgeon to sign off on referrals for outside treatment, and all of these factors must be taken into consideration. A very point the Honourable Lady, my colleague, referred to in her intervention. Between 1998 and 2018, some 11,000 vaginal mesh implants were performed in Northern Ireland. Other Department of Health figures indicate that nearly 7,000 procedures occurred between 2005 and 2015 alone, and with conservative estimates suggesting between 5 and 10% of those patients experience significant problems, the scale is clear. For children affected, where the UK-wide estimate is roughly 20,000, Pacific and Northern Ireland figures are often extrapolated. Reports from the Republic of Ireland, for instance, estimate some 1,250 children affected there. And if we look at that significant group from down south and refer that on separate figures, but for Northern Ireland, based on similar prescribing patterns, and as of 2023, the Patient Safety Commissioner noted that across the UK, an average of 3 babies per month are still born after exposure to the drug. I'm not taking the extra minute, Madam Chair, because I recognise that there's others have to do that as well. All of these people, including the 600 members of Sling the Mesh NI, are awaiting action. And on this, the second anniversary of the report, the stagnation of action is not acceptable. And I take the opportunity to speak on their behalf, my constituents in Northern Ireland, the Honourable Lady's constituents from Northern Ireland, and ask that we stop waiting and start moving on the compensation, and that the help for those who are suffering this very minute, that this debate takes place. My request to the Minister is to hurry the process so that we in Northern Ireland can fall in behind what happens here directly. Let us not see a third anniversary without fulfilment of the recommendations and our word, Madam Chair, our word in this place. Thank you.
Here, here.
Yeah. Justin Madders.
Thank you, Dr. Alan. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, as always, but of course it's not a pleasure to be here marking 2 years since the publication of the Hughes report, because sadly in that time those recommendations seem to have been in a holding pattern somewhere in the Department for Health and Social Care. And other members have rightly spoken about the victims in this, and I think about my constituent mostly today. She contacted me over 5 years ago, first raising concerns about the tragic loss of her son when he was 30, and she believes that the sodium valproate medication that she took during her pregnancy was responsible for his learning difficulties and ultimately his early passing. She quite understandably feels let down by the state, and she's also concerned about the profound effect this may have had on her other children, and the fact that she was not alerted to the risks of this by the authorities. And what I found particularly disappointing is that, having contacted numerous Secretaries of State during that time, we've had no more than vague commitments and assurances that this issue will be addressed in due course. That doesn't cut it for my constituent, and nor does it, sadly, do anything to assuage the guilt that she feels wrongly, in my opinion. In other national scandals, the government have eventually provided funding for mechanisms to compensate those affected, for example, as we've heard, in infected blood and the Post Office Horizon system. But they too had to wait decades for that. And it's just disappointing, actually, the recognition that I think we all had at the time that those systems were introduced, that those delays had compounded the injustice, has not translated itself into any visible progress for those harmed by valproate and pelvic mesh. And I agree with the Honourable for New Forest East that in those schemes the interim payment system has been seen as a way to at least get some measure of redress, and I'm disappointed that we've not been able to learn from that experience and use a similar system for the people we're talking about today. And of course I have sympathy for the views set out by the Secretary of State that redress must be considered alongside other patient groups, but I do not think that justifies inaction. Those harmed by valproate and pelvic mesh are frustrated by the delays and the obfuscation. The State has acknowledged and apologised for its failings. It has commissioned and published 2 reports on the matter that have both recommended that redress is provided to patients. But we've reached the point where reports and recommendations are not enough. It is now time for the Government to act and to provide the support that many victims of this scandal deserve and need to be able to manage their ongoing conditions. The can has been kicked down the road for too long. Campaigners and those affected are understandably frustrated and anxious for change. So I would like to ask the Minister 2 things, echoing the questions raised by the Honourable Member for Chesham and Amersham. First, can she confirm if there has actually been any estimate of the total costs of providing redress? If so, can she share that today? That might at least give campaigners some hope things are actually moving forward. Secondly, can she confirm if she's discussed funding redress with the Treasury for inclusion at future fiscal events? I look forward to the Minister responding. If she's not able to provide specific answers today, a commitment that she will do so, or a colleague will do so in future, as well as some clear sense that those who have suffered are now actually being listened to.
I know people are keen to hear from the Minister, so I now have to bring the speaking time down to 3 minutes. If there are any interventions, be aware I'll have to bring it down even further. I'd now like to call Marie Goldman.
Chair, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Chesham and Amersham, for securing this vital and very timely debate. First, I want to recognise the victims of these 2 scandals, sodium valproate and pelvic mesh, their families, and especially the women, who are yet again, through no fault of their own, another example of the UK's unacceptable gender health gap. I've spoken previously about my constituent Mary on several occasions in the House. It is a pleasure to welcome her and other women affected by these scandals here today to watch this debate. I want to thank Mary and other campaigning mothers such as Karen and Deborah, who've already been mentioned today, for their tireless work to bring the fetal valproate syndrome to my and other members' attention and to keep this injustice in the spotlight. Indeed, mothers like Mary have had to reckon not just with looking after their children with complex needs, who regularly require round-the-clock care, but also with the exhausting campaign work they continue to do to try to keep the focus on the plight of their children in an attempt to receive better support. Now, one of the points that Mary and other mothers with children affected by fetal valproate syndrome are clearest about is the fact that this is an evolving disability. No one knows the true damage that this drug may be causing victims as they grow older, and they continue to grow older, and those symptoms are evolving as they do, often with children's complex conditions deteriorating. This can make appointments with GPs and other healthcare specialists incredibly difficult and complex, and lack of awareness and understanding about this within the medical community simply exacerbates and makes it even harder for the mothers to get on with helping their children. It is therefore of vital importance that measures are brought into the clinician training curriculum, and these absolutely must feature testimonies from victims of medical scandals so that the medical community truly understands what it is that they are facing. It cannot be underlined enough, all of these challenges are not hypothetical questions to these women and their families. They are their everyday realities. It is for this reason that it is incredibly frustrating and, to be quite honest, angering for these mothers that over 2 whole years after the publication of Professor Henrietta Hughes' report into sodium valproate and mesh implants, not only has the government not responded, but they have of late been stating that they, and I quote, will respond in due course. Now, I'm sorry, but what a totally rubbish, useless and uncaring answer. Much is spoken about distrust in our politics and our politicians in this country. That sort of mealy-mouthed answer, I'm afraid, does absolutely nothing to restore that trust. We must do better. There's so much more that I have to say, but I'm very conscious of time. So I just want to say that Mary told me this morning that we are exhausted from fighting. And she said that her plea would be for MPs to find out more and to do more and to raise more awareness. So that's the plea that I leave with the House. And the government has an obligation to support families like Mary's. I hope that it will do the right thing.
Yeah. James Wilde.
Thank you very much, Alan Carr. I thank the Honourable Member for bringing this debate. Like other Honourable Members, I was here last year on the first anniversary of the Hughes report, and it's a stark reminder of how issues can drift. But for those who've suffered, the passing year hasn't just slipped by quietly, and yet we still hear the same language from ministers about a response coming in due course. those words ring very hollow to the victims whose patience has long since run out. And ministers have previously said this is a complex issue requiring action across multiple departments, and I readily accept that, but that's precisely why Professor Hughes recommended the interim scheme and those payments in 2025, but 2025 came and went with no response and no payments. And Professor Hughes wrote that report, as she said, in order to drive action. She would not have done it otherwise. It's about how that compensation is paid and not whether it is paid. And it is frankly extraordinary that she felt she had to use statutory powers to go to number 10, to the Prime Minister, to try and drive progress on this issue. And in the debate last year, I spoke about my constituents, Colleen and Andy, and other families who've been blighted by this scandal. And when I met them, they talked about their son, Byron. And Colleen has epilepsy and was prescribed sodium valproate, but she was never warned that it could harm her unborn child. And Byron lives with autism, learning disabilities, communication difficulties, and epilepsy. And their experience is far too common. Families like them deserve decisive action from the government. And when I pressed the Health Secretary at Health Questions last month, he said we were right to hold the government's feet to the fire, and there was work across government and promised updates, but there haven't been any updates. He's previously spoken himself about the failure of the state to recognise and put right wrongs and its mistakes, yet 2 years on, we're still waiting for some action. So victims don't need any more words, they need action. And as Professor Hughes has said, the lack of a response feels very devastating to those families. And for the sake of those families who suffered, the government needs to act now. There's been plenty of time to learn from other compensation schemes, to secure funding from the Treasury for compensation, to set out even a timeline for redress. So can I ask the Minister, when will interim payments finally be made to those affected and give families the relief they urgently need? And at the very least, can the Minister commit that the government will make interim payments this year? Otherwise, that would be an utter disgrace.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan, for your chairship, and I congratulate the member for Chesham and Amersham for bringing this debate today. I want to put one family at the heart of my response, and that's my constituent Catherine and her son Matthew, who I mentioned in Prime Minister's questions last February, 12 months ago. When she was pregnant, Catherine did what any parent would do. She trusted the medical advice that she was given. She was prescribed sodium valproate, a medicine used to treat epilepsy, as has been discussed here. Matthew is now 24 years old, and as a result of that medical advice, he has lifelong needs and a learning disability. He's done incredibly well, securing a part-time job and maintaining a level of independence while walking around the village where he lives. Matthew was also incredibly proud to take part in the 2024 general election, and he voted in the hope that there would finally be redress for those affected by the valproate scandal. He has since written to the Prime Minister, and I have to put on record my frustration to see how his correspondence was passed from pillar to post, and only after several chases by me did he receive a response that was entirely inappropriate for somebody with a learning disability. Catherine and her family provide significant support to Matthew, and his life is all the richer for it. But this isn't the case for all children impacted by sodium valproate, and there is a point in time when Catherine won't be able to provide that support any longer. She and families in this room fear that day, and they want the state to make sure that specialist assessments, therapies, adaptations, lost earnings and round-the-clock care are provisioned for now, so that a secure future for their children is guaranteed. And that is why the Patient Safety Commissioner's report is so important. It sets out a clear and workable route, and it is the responsibility of this government to acknowledge that. Every month of delay is another month where parents are left to patch together support, fight for diagnoses, battle through fragmented services, and carry costs that should never have landed on their shoulders. So today I want to ask the Minister directly, as I asked the Prime Minister 12 months ago, will the government commit to a clear timetable for implementing the Hughes recommendations? Because for Catherine and Matthew,
the argument that this is complex simply does not land. Their lives are already complex, more complex than most of us can even imagine. And what they are asking the government to do is simple: to accept responsibility for this scandal and to act now while that redress can still be meaningful. The question today is whether this government, the government that both Catherine and Matthew were desperate to see when I first met them as a candidate, will match that urgency with action. And I hope the Minister will take seriously all of the representations that have been made today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend for bringing forward this important debate. We've had the findings from the Hughes report for over 2 years now, when it called on the government to provide financial redress to patients and families affected by sodium valproate use and pelvic mesh. The previous government refused to act, and it increasingly feels as though the current government is also burying its head in the sand rather than confronting the scale of this injustice. My constituent Nick is one of those living with the consequences of this inaction. His son Oliver was born with fetal valproate syndrome after Nick's wife took it during pregnancy to control her epilepsy. Tragically, Nick's wife has since died, leaving Nick to raise Oliver alone. Nick tells me it's hard to adequately explain how difficult Oliver's life has been and how much he worries about his future. Valproate has changed Oliver's life forever, and all Nick wants is answers and meaningful action from the government. He quite rightly continually chases me for answers on when the government will make a decision on the Hughes report. So on behalf of Nick and Oliver, I ask very directly, can the Minister answer when we will finally get a response to the Hughes report? How much longer does the government need to carefully consider recommendations that have already been scrutinised, evidenced and endorsed? Families like Nick's cannot wait indefinitely while the government deliberates. And while we have this opportunity, it's also vital we recognise the devastating impact of Primados, a hormonal pregnancy test used until the 1980s, which was not included in the Hughes report but was part of the Cumberledge Review, on families across the country, hundreds of whose children were born with fetal abnormalities. Many of those affected are now older, and tragically some are dying without ever receiving acknowledgement, accountability or compensation. Pelvic mesh, valproate, Primados represent some of the most significant health scandals in modern times. They've disproportionately affected women, and yet time and again we see the same pattern: warnings ignored, evidence dismissed, and victims left to fight for justice on their own. These scandals have gone on for far too long with little action from successive governments. Those affected by valproate and Primados are not asking for the impossible. They simply want those responsible to acknowledge the mistakes that were made and take responsibility for the harms caused. If we're serious about restoring trust in our healthcare system and serious about supporting women, then we must start by delivering justice to those who've been failed so profoundly.
Spokespeople, I'd love to start with Caroline Voden, please.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan, and I thank my honourable friend for securing this very important debate. Last Saturday marked 2 years since the publication of the Hughes report, 2 years since Patient Safety Commissioner Dr Henrietta Hughes set out clear, compassionate recommendations for redress for those affected by sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. And yet 2 years on, families are still waiting, women are still suffering, children still living with devastating disabilities, and the government is still silent. As many others have said here this morning, I too salute the courage of all those who have campaigned so hard on this issue for so long, many of them doing so while living with devastating injury. And I would like to share the human cost of this scandal, an example of a life destroyed by a medical procedure that was badly performed and went horrifically wrong. This is the experience of my constituent Susan. In 2009, Susan underwent a transvaginal tape procedure for mild stress urinary incontinence. The mesh was catastrophically misplaced, causing immediate and lasting harm. Within months, her health had deteriorated so badly that she was forced to close her CQC-registered medical clinic and abandon a professional career that she had built up over 3 decades. Believing the mesh to be the cause, she sought help and was referred to a surgeon presented to her as an expert in mesh removal. She gave clear written consent for the removal of all remaining mesh. Instead, unbelievably, an additional reconstructive procedure was carried out without her knowledge or consent, never discussed beforehand, never explained afterwards, and not even disclosed to her GP. She was then told that the mesh was probably all removed. It was not. Years later, specialist MRI imaging confirmed substantial mesh remained embedded in her pelvis and abdominal wall, and by the time the truth became clear, she was out of time to pursue a legal claim. Recently, when Susan tried to pursue her case again, the legal system demanded over £10,000 for a barrister's opinion. Given the loss of her high-end professional career, she simply no longer had the financial means to proceed. The financial ruin caused by the mesh injuries had effectively barred her from accessing the courts and seeking the compensation she so rightly deserves. Today, she lives with constant pain, severe incontinence, chronic infection, and profound psychological trauma. Her financial losses run into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, and she is still waiting for a government response that should have come 2 years ago. And I would also like to share another constituent's experience, Caroline. In 2016, Caroline underwent mesh insertion. Within just 3 weeks, serious complications began. But what followed was not prompt medical care. It was 6 years of being repeatedly dismissed and gaslighted by multiple healthcare professionals, including the very surgeon who had implanted the mesh. When Caroline raised concerns during an internal examination, the surgeon's demeanour changed significantly for the worse. Her symptoms continued to be disregarded, and for 12 months she had to persistently self-advocate before finally being referred to a specialist mesh complication service. The specialists identified that the mesh had twisted, leaving her with no option but full mesh removal surgery. That surgery took place in July 2023, more than 7 years after the original procedure. The impact on Caroline's life has been devastating. She has endured years of significant physical pain and declining health. She's been forced to become financially dependent on her personal savings, as her ability to work has been severely limited. Universal credit and NHS travel support are means tested, leaving her out of pocket for essential medical travel and other related expenses. Susan's story is not just one person's story, neither is Caroline's. Across the country, thousands of women are living this reality every single day. Women are living with chronic pain, infections, and life-altering complications from pelvic mesh implants, mesh that was supposed to help them, but instead has eroded into organs, caused urinary problems, bleeding, left them unable to work, unable to exercise, unable to have intimate relationships with the people they love. In short, unable to live normal lives. And as well as this, children are living with devastating neurodevelopmental disorders and birth defects caused by sodium valproate exposure in the womb. Parents at breaking point, struggling with the emotional, practical and financial burden of caring for children whose conditions were entirely preventable. As Janet Williams and Emma Murph, 2 mothers of children with fetal valproate syndrome, wrote to the Prime Minister and Chancellor, families affected by sodium valproate exposure do not have the luxury of time. Our children are growing, their care needs are increasing, and their families are at breaking point. Let me remind the House of the timeline of this shameful delay. In July 2020, the Cumberledge Review recommended urgent redress. The government refused. 2.5 years later, they finally tasked the Patient Safety Commissioner to look at this issue again. On 7th of February 2024, 2 years ago, last Saturday, Dr. Henrietta Hughes published her report. It was unequivocal, calling for an independent redress scheme including £100,000 interim payments for valproate victims and comprehensive medical and financial support for mesh survivors. These were not radical demands. They were the minimum response required to address preventable tragedies that have devastated thousands of lives. And yet the response remains a hollow promise of careful consideration. There was no published response from the last government, and 6 months into this one, we are still, not 6 months, 18 months into this one, we are still told action will come in due course. This delay is not just a bureaucratic failure, it's part of a disturbing pattern seen in the Primados and infected blood scandals. It is a pattern where women and vulnerable patients are ignored, evidence is dismissed, and recommendations left to gather dust. Running through it all, as Susan and Caroline's cases demonstrate so starkly, it is a persistent culture of cover-up and denial. Compensation alone is not enough. We must ensure that such harm is never inflicted again.
The Liberal Democrats are calling for a policy response that protects patients from the horrors of mesh implant side effects in absolute terms, with a full and continuing moratorium. Far too often, recommendations from inquiries into medical scandals are neglected. There should be annual reporting to Parliament on progress, including on how the government is addressing every issue highlighted by the Hughes report. And central to preventing future scandals is ending the culture of cover-up that has been exposed time and again by medical scandal inquiries. The culture that allowed Susan to be told her mesh had been removed when it had not. The culture that allowed Caroline to be gaslighted for 6 years by the very professionals who should have helped her. And the doubtful legal procedures outlined by the member for Chesham and Amersham. That is why we support the Public Office Accountability Bill, the Hillsborough Law, which will enshrine a statutory duty of candour on all public authorities and provide bereaved families with equal legal representation at inquests. The collapse of the bill at the 11th hour was deeply disappointing, and ministers now need to listen to the Hillsborough families and bring forward a solution with urgency that ensures everyone in security services too are covered by this law. But a duty of candour must go hand in hand with protection for brave individuals who speak up when they see harm being done. We strongly oppose the government's decision to scrap key patient safety organisations, including whistleblowing and speak-up programmes such as the National Guardian, and we also oppose moves to remove patient voice, including the proposed abolition of local health watch organisations. The sodium valproate and pelvic mesh scandals represent fundamental failures of our healthcare system to protect vulnerable women and children. It was a major failure of the last Conservative government not to deliver compensation, which has been recommended not only by the Patient Safety Commissioner but also by the Cumberledge Review which preceded it. The Liberal Democrats have consistently called for the acceptance of every one of the recommendations from the Cumberledge Review and for a fulsome response to the Hughes report, setting out how this government now will redress these terrible injustices. 2 years since the Hughes report is long enough to wait. 4 years since Cumberledge is far too long. And for women like Susan, who've been waiting since 2009 for justice, 16 years is unconscionable. Families deserve answers, women deserve compensation and corrective surgery where appropriate. Children deserve the support and care they need, and they all deserve justice. Everyone affected by the valproate and vaginal mesh scandal should have an apology, compensation, corrective surgery where needed, and psychological support. So I ask the Minister again, what active conversations are currently being held with the Treasury about redress payments? I urge the Government to commit today to publishing a full response to the Hughes report, to implementing its recommendations in full, and to ensuring that no family or individual affected by medical negligence ever has to fight this hard, this long, for basic recognition of the harm that was done to them. Thank you.
Caroline Johnson.
Chairmanship this morning. On behalf of the opposition, I'd like to thank the member for Chesham and Amersham for requesting today's and securing today's debate. She has campaigned tirelessly on this issue, giving a voice to thousands of women who've been let down by the state. I'd also like to thank Henrietta Hughes for the Hughes report. Thousands of pregnant women were prescribed sodium valproate between 1973 and 2017, despite growing evidence of harm. In 1972, scientists found in animal studies that it was harmful to fetuses. And in 1984, fetal valproate syndrome entered the medical literature. Studies in the 2000s highlighted the link between valproate and birth defects. I remember, perhaps like yourself, Madam Chair, learning about this at medical school. Yet it was only in 2018 that a valproate pregnancy prevention programme came into force, and this was too late for more than 20,000 children with entirely preventable disability. Over 10,000 women in England were harmed by pelvic mesh. Mesh kits were issued in the 2000s to treat urinary incontinence and prolapse, despite a lack of long-time safety data. Women suffered hideous complications, mesh tearing through tissue, bleeding, infection, sexual dysfunction. Shockingly, it took until 2018 for NHS England to suspend the routine use of these implants. And I wanted to raise a case of a lady who's now in her 30s, Madam Chair, who had this mesh implant put to prevent a hernia in her abdominal wall, something that's often missed from the discussions about mesh. She describes how she's unable to leave her home because there is a hole in her stomach wall where the mesh has eroded away. It's unable to be removed. The surgeon has described it stuck in there like chewing gum. She described her wish for a family. She described the smell of the constant infections. She described the fear of waiting for the next infection and wondering whether the sepsis from it will kill her. And yet there seems to be no way of her getting this mesh removed. The previous government didn't sit on its hands. The former Health Secretary, the member for Godalming and Ash, commissioned the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review after hearing from over 700 affected people and medical stakeholders. The previous government issued a formal apology to victims and appointed a patient safety commissioner. It began establishing a network of centres to provide comprehensive treatment, care and advice for those affected by the implanted mesh. And an update on that I'll be grateful for from the Minister, particularly in light of the case that I described. In 2022, the previous government asked the new Commissioner to report on options for compensating victims. Dr Henrietta Hughes did that in February 2024, a full 24 months ago. And that report set out what justice should look like for victims, an interim redress scheme and a permanent one to follow. And as my right honourable friend from New Forest East said in his speech, it was a package of very clear, practical steps to right the wrongs done to so many women. Yet 2 years on, and we're no further forward. After the 2024 election, the member for Chesham and Amersham asked the government when it would respond to the Hughes report. The response? The government would consider the recommendations and meet with the Commissioner. In January 25, when asked by Baroness Ritchie of Downpatrick, the government said it was carefully considering the report and would provide an update at the earliest opportunity. In March, in this very room, a government minister said that recommendations were being actively considered and a report was coming at the earliest opportunity. In that debate, the minister suggested research by Dr Rebecca Bromley was material. Could the minister update us on that research? In October, when the member for Rushcliffe asked whether funding had been allocated for a redress, the minister said recommendations were being carefully considered and a response would come at the earliest opportunity. In December, when the Shadow Secretary of State for Health asked whether financial support was forthcoming, the government said recommendations were being still carefully considered. Last month, when the member for Harrow East asked whether funding was forthcoming, a minister said the government was carefully considering the report and an update was coming in due course. Madam Chair, what we've heard from ministers is so frustrating. For 18 months, members have been asked what's being done, and time again, this Labour government has refused to give a clear answer. I also note that the previous debate we had the member for West Lancashire, and parliamentary questions have been answered by her and the Minister for South West Glasgow. We have a different minister today. It's a delight to see her, but perhaps she could confirm which minister takes responsibility in the Commons for this issue. Further questions to the Minister. On which date did work begin on a response to the Hughes report? How many civil servants are working on the response? Have there been any conversations with Treasury about the costs of the redress scheme? If work has been taking place, why is it invisible? And if in fact nothing has been done, why has the government persisted in telling members of a response is forthcoming? Why, despite Dr Hughes visiting the department in December, has nothing materially changed? Will the government, as my honourable friend from North West Norfolk asked, make an interim payment this calendar year? Over the weekend, the Patient Safety Commissioner told ITV, and I quote, "This is a disgraceful way that patients and families are being treated by those in power." She's absolutely right. The state's #1 duty is to protect the public from harm. Yet, after inflicting harm, the state has failed to make things right. And this is part of a pattern under Labour where systemic failings, particularly those affecting women, go unresolved. Every day that victims of mesh and valproate do not receive justice, confidence in health professionals is undermined. We know the Chancellor is fast running out of other people's money, but it is wrong to balance the books on the backs of those who are suffering. Justice is the state's duty. It is not optional. It is not something to just be carefully considered for years on end, indefinitely, while women and children suffer. The government can respect the victims and the work of the Patient Safety Commissioner today by answering our questions, or it can continue its parade of platitudes and evasion. I look forward to the Minister's response.
Minister. Thank you, Dr Alan. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship this morning, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address the House today following the second year anniversary of the report by the Patient Safety Commissioner, Dr Henrietta Hughes. And can I pay tribute to her work and, as others have done, to Baroness Cumberledge for her work in the lead-up to that. that report. And I'd also like to thank the Honourable Member for Chesham Amersham for bringing forward this important debate. And I think the debate this afternoon has been really thoughtful and constructive on an issue that is a highly sensitive one across the House and for campaigners and people who are here today and also watching online. And to answer the Honourable Lady's initial question, I am leading this debate on behalf of my Honourable friend, the Minister for Health, Innovation and Patient Safety. He is the lead minister for this area and unfortunately can't be here today. As members understand, that is often an issue of standing in, but I'm happy to do so. And it is a matter of great interest to him personally. And also, as colleagues know, he's a clinician, so patient safety and understanding how that works from a clinical aspect is a very valuable insight into this work. And at the outset, if I can say, before I give all my remarks, he very much wanted me to be very clear that he, of course, he is very happy, as the Honourable Lady leading the debate wanted to ask, to meet campaigners to discuss in more detail some of the work following my comments today. And he has met with the Patient Safety Commissioner in December to discuss the ongoing work by the department in relation to her report. Since then, he's continued his engagement with the Commissioner regarding how we can do more to address the immediate needs of those affected by sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. And as Dr. Alan Khan, as we've heard, and many of us know, because I think we've all had constituents, and many people who can't be here today have had constituents caught up in this, that some of these women's lives, as well as their families, have been changed forever because they were misled in the past about the effects of sodium valproate and surgical mesh. Again, we've had many examples today, and I've had that in my constituency with my constituents women sharing the most intimate details of the impact they have. And I know that was truly harrowing for me and many honourable members to listen to that, and for those women who bravely shared those details for strangers, their members of Parliament. And I think that point's been made well by many honourable members, including my friend from Rushcliffe, Frome East and Somerset, and the Liberal Democrat opposition spokesperson on behalf of her constituency. And we absolutely owe them honesty, transparency and contrition. And we are determined to make sure the lessons are learnt and to keep patient safety at the heart of the reform. And my friend, the member for Wolverhampton West, with his experience representing these women, quite rightly highlighted the issue of trust. And that is so important for the system as we go forward. Our focus does remain on building a system that listens, hears and acts with speed, compassion and proportionality. And everybody who has suffered complications from sodium valproate and pelvic mesh implants do have, of course, my deepest sympathies. And I do express my gratitude to Dr. Hughes and her team for the report, published 2 years ago, as well as her continued engagement with the department in regard to her Patient Safety Commissioner. I will, but I do want to get through the comments, but I will give way to the...
You've said that you support a system that acts with speed, so could you give us some idea of when there might be some response?
I want to address main concerns, and as I said, the Minister is very keen to talk with members and campaigners as well, so if I may. So we do remain committed to our work alongside Dr. Hughes and her team so that we can better support patients and ensure the steps that are taken to prevent similar harm in the future, both in this area and across the wider patient safety landscape. And that is obviously crucial. And many honourable members have raised that as women's voices in this area, and this is a campaign in previous Parliament as well that many of us have been involved in, we must make sure that women's voices are better heard in the health system. As my friend from Morecambe and Lonsdale said, the campaigners are doing that, and again I pay tribute as she did to, in fact, Sling the Mesh and very many other patient groups, and particularly on behalf of women who have raised this. They shouldn't have to, but I do commend their work. And I want to assure members here and people listening that we remain committed to advancing this work across government and to taking forward, looking at lessons from any cases in which patient safety has been affected. Now, I fully understand, Dr. Alan Khan, why colleagues are asking for an official response to the Hughes report here and now. It is important that we get this right. and we need to carefully consider all options and the associated costs before coming to a decision on the report's specific recommendations. And can I reconfirm my friend the Minister's letter in November, which I'm sure many honourable members have seen, as he said in his response to the Patient Safety Commissioner in November, that work does include, of course, looking at the costs. We must take forward the lessons learnt from this work, and this government is doing that. The work on other similar areas, as highlighted by the member for New Forest East and my friend the member for Ellesmere Port and Bromborough. We have to ensure that the approach does provide meaningful support, often ongoing, as has been highlighted here today, who have been so profoundly affected. So with regards to financial redress, the government has to consider options collectively with input from a number of departments. We have started that work immediately. I mean, it has been raised, obviously. The previous government did not respond to that report when it came forward. So this is work that we have picked up with Baroness Merrin initially as the lead minister, and now Minister Ahmed in this government. The minister, to assure members from Strangford and Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, has recently met with the devolved government health ministers to further discuss their respective positions, and he will of course continue to do that across all devolved government areas, because as members have raised, that also obviously affects patients there too. And we have to proceed with care to ensure that correct approach is taken. And we are committed to providing updates at the earliest opportunity once all relevant advice and implications are considered. On non-financial redress, the Department is committed to meeting the needs of current patients. I'm going to continue, if I may. The Department is committed to meeting the needs of current patients with clinical requirements via three principal avenues. Firstly, by improving the current clinical services and treatment to patients. Secondly, by commissioning further research and development programmes on sodium valproate and pelvic mesh to address the remaining knowledge gaps. And can I commend the comments from my friend, the member for Bexley Heath and Crayford, for sharing again his personal experiences and really laying bare the deep complexity and need for really for more research and development programmes, which the Minister is committed to doing. And the member for Leicester East, with his clinical knowledge, I think added useful experience in this debate today. That is absolutely what the Minister will be taking forward. The third avenue is around initiating longer-term preventive measures that will help ensure the system can pick up on adverse trends in patient care and act more quickly in the future. I'll take those in turn. Although the on-improvement clinical services, although the number of women up to the age of 54 that have been prescribed sodium valproate has nearly halved since 2018, there is a significant group of patients already affected who have complex and varied needs, and the health system has to ensure this cohort receives high-quality, tailored care. The NHS England has committed a pilot project on foetal exposure to medicine in the north of England involving multiple clinical specialties and a wide range of clinical experts that will undertake a comprehensive review of the service. 80 patients have been seen as part of the pilot, representing 560 appointments and 650 clinical hours. And we've received feedback from patients on the value of being seen by clinical experts and wider multidisciplinary teams that has had on their quality of life. And we're considering options to further commission this service nationwide. NHS England have also completed an internal review of mesh centres across England. Mesh centres undoubtedly offer a valuable and impactful service, with nearly 3,000 patients now seen in this service since their introduction. However, as a relatively new service, there remains a distinct area for improvement, and we will closely look at the results from the internal review and promptly deliver the necessary improvements. With regard to further research and development, the National Institute for Health and Care Research has been commissioned for a £1.56 million study to develop a patient-reported outcome measures for prolapse, incontinence and mesh complication surgery. And in the longer term, these measures will be integrated into the pelvic floor registry, which monitors and improves the safety of mesh patients. Further research is also taking place in this area, and we'll make sure that future work takes into account the recommendations from both the pilot project and the mesh centre audit. On longer-term prevention work, recent discussions with NHS England and the Medicines Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency indicate that longer-term improvements in digitisation will help position the UK as a world leader in reducing
valproate exposed birds and applying these insights into other teratogenic medicines. The Department will explore increasing centralisation and visibility of the annual risk acknowledgement form across care settings, as highlighted in the Hughes report, and may also consider expanding the medicine and pregnancy register to better link with data with research outcomes. I will. I think this honourable gentleman, sorry.
Thank you, Minister, for giving way, and I appreciate the complexities of the steps that she's outlining. But nevertheless, repeated interventions from members today have asked for a timescale. So can the Minister say, will she respond by the end of this session? Will she respond by the autumn? Will she respond by the end of the calendar year? Can she give us some clarification, please?
I'm happy to answer that at the end of my comments, but I'm happy to take that intervention from the honourable gentleman.
To the Minister, and I appreciate she's not the Minister with primary responsibility for this. What worries me is that we're hearing an awful lot about process, and what I fear is really going on is that ministers have been told at the highest possible level by the Chancellor or a Treasury Minister that this money for redress is not going to be made available, and they have to take that as their starting point. She may not be able to confirm this now, but I would like an answer as to whether or not a conversation of that sort has taken place.
Well, I thank honourable members for both those comments, and experienced parliamentarians will know that I will be able to say, and as the Minister has outlined in his letter, that of course costs, which I think is what the honourable gentleman is alluding to, is part of the overall consideration, of course, as well as the complexity in the work that the Minister is leading on behalf of the Department across all government departments. I'm going to close by emphasising again we are profoundly sorry, of course, for the enduring harm experienced by women affected by sodium valproate and pelvic mesh. Their pain, which we keep in our minds at all times, and the life-altering consequences they have suffered are truly heartbreaking, and we recognise the immense toll this has taken across them and their families, many of which we've heard again today. We have listened closely to the calls for clarity, speed and decisive action on the report's recommendations. We are, to be very clear, committed to setting out our response at the earliest credible opportunity, ensuring that it has to be both robust and deliverable. And as I think we've heard again today, honourable members here and people listening recognise the complexity about that. But can I assure people listening, as I said at the beginning, the Minister is determined to progress on this matter, and he is willing to meet with campaigners and discuss that in more detail, as honourable members have asked us to do today. Thank you.
Sarah Green to wind up.
Thank you, Chair. In the November letter the Minister is referring to the Patient Safety Commissioner, the Minister responsible says, in reference to redress, that additional information is still required on the practicalities of further action on this area. This includes approaches to cost and affordability, legislation and scope of the potential redress. No final timetable has been agreed at present. I think the contributions we've heard, the thoughtful and insightful contributions we've heard today, show that members are not going to stop asking the question. And in tribute to the many families and campaigners who are so inspiring and yet exhausted, I hope very much that we are not here in 12 months' time dusting down the same speeches, chasing for progress. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered the second anniversary of the Hughes report. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. call Adam Dance to move the motion and I will then call the Minister to respond. I remind other members that they may only make a speech with prior permission from the member in charge of the debate and the Minister. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30-minute debates. Order, order. Adam Dance to move the motion.
Thank you. I beg to move that this House has considered the future of new medium helicopter programme. Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. It is a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I'd also like to thank the Minister for being able to answer our pressing questions again, because I recognise how hard him and his team are working, and a headache we must give him going on about new medium helicopter. After retiring the Puma from service last year, the UK currently has a capability gap. We have no medium-lift helicopter ability for armed forces. That means there is a clear requirement for helicopters to transport troops, equipment and supplies over long distances, over difficult terrain and over a wide range of missions. And while we hear a lot about future of warfare in the age of drones and even greater technology development, crewed helicopters are still key to a joint force that will allow our military to effectively respond to the ever-growing threats we face. So, we have a gap that needs filling. That is what the new medium helicopter programme is for. And after being the last remaining bidder of the £1 billion contract, Leonardo is ready to fill that gap by offering the AW149 helicopter built in the home of British helicopters in my constituency of Yeovil. While I know the Minister will tell us it is far more complex than many people outside the defence may realise, I think he can appreciate that many it does seem quite simple. You've got one bidder in a contract that is a win-win-win. It fills a capability requirement, it will help us boost defence spending and modernise our armed forces, and it will provide the investment in British jobs and apprenticeships in Yeovil the Prime Minister told me that he's determined to deliver. Of course I'll give way.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward? He's right to highlight the issue for the jobs in his own constituent, but further afield, because there's many other companies depend on him. But does he also agree that this contract is crucial for replacing the RAF Puma HC2 fleet and subsequently also critical and crucial to national security, and that really, honestly, the Minister and the Government must prioritise and fund this replacement accordingly, and at the end must come to the dithering, and instead action must be taken?
I agree with my honourable friend. We really do need action. We need to make sure we arm our armed forces with the correct equipment now. By contrast, not awarding the contract is a lose-lose-lose situation, particularly for my constituency, because the future of the new medium helicopter is also the future of Yeovil. Leonardo have been clear. If this programme does not go ahead, they must seriously consider the future of the Yeovil site. That puts over 3,000 skilled jobs directly at the site in Yeovil at risk, alongside 12,000 in the regional supply chain and a 320 million contribution to local GDP. It would also see huge investment in my community go, starting with £1.2 million to Yeovil College, which does fantastic work training the skilled people we actually need in our defence sector. It would also see Westminster Entertainment Centre go, a new solar farm, never finished, and so much more. It will be the death of my town. Local businesses have told me they're shut overnight if Leonardo goes. House prices will fall, and young people trained in Yeovil will leave. But not awarding the new medium helicopter also has a real knock-on effect for our country's defence, because I think this point gets a little lost in jargon of sovereign capability. If the site in Yeovil closes, we risk losing our country's ability to build our own helicopters from start to finish, at exactly the time when the world is becoming really unstable and insecure. And when you put it like that, as people back home tell me, it sounds utterly insane to not get on with the programme and secure the future of Yeovil site.
Will you give way?
Of course I'll give way.
I thank my honourable friend and constituency neighbour for giving way. He will know that many of the people who work at the Leonardo site live in West Dorset and commute in, and they're responsible for providing training and apprentice opportunities for thousands of my constituents. I feel like every single strategic defence review talks about the urgent need to speed up procurement. I feel like it is repeated ad nauseum. Even this most recent one recognises that the uncertainty around procurement undermines national security. He's already rightly identified that this was a sole bidder. It is vital for the UK sovereign capability. Does he agree with me that unless the government starts to show that it is serious about speeding up procurement in the defence sector, we will lose vital industries like our ability to make helicopters, as well as thousands in the supply chain supporting them?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. It doesn't just affect our constituency, it affects many constituencies in the South West. And Leonardo are the backbone of our area, and we must secure the contract. But that is not the only knock-on effect. The site in Yeovil was making fantastic progress on the Proteus uncrewed helicopter, which was recently successfully tested. But even though we are one of the few nations leading on this, if Leonardo cannot sustain its current workforce, skills and funding, then we lose these skills and we could potentially lose Proteus. Once these skills are gone, they are really hard to get back. So not awarding this contract will undermine the government's drive for greater autonomy in our armed forces. So given all that, why the delay? As far back as June last year, I was told to listen out. Well, Dr. Alan Khan, I've heard so little since. I was worried I might have lost my hearing, but don't worry, I had my ears checked. They are working just fine. It seems actually the problem is not one can get the defence investment plan to work. We were told that the DIP, as it's called, would answer all. It would set out the government's plan for spending on our defence and armed forces, including on the new medium helicopter. But at this point, we might as well call it the delayed investment plan.
Would you give way, my own friend?
Of course.
Thank you very much. I thank him for giving way. The new Chief of Defence Staff told me on the Defence Select Committee that the medium helicopter programme was still very much on the Armed Forces list of priorities. So does he agree with me that the government needs to ensure that this is in the Defence Investment Plan, because the service chiefs are asking for this, and it's not all about uncrewed capability. We will always need that crewed capability. So I'm saying that this needs to be prioritised now, even before the Defence Investment Plan comes out, because the Minister will tell us we're still working it through. So I think the Treasury and the MOD need to get their act together so that, do you agree with me, that this needs to be reinforced to save those jobs, 3,000 jobs, plus all that supply chain through the SMEs that supply Yeovil to enable to deliver this programme?
I completely honourable friend, and actually I come on to that a bit later, and I mention your question in my speech. But in my last question on this, the Minister told me it will be published when it's ready. That is the real problem. Leonardo's best and final offer will expire in March this year. But even more worrying are the reports of the £28 billion funding gap for our armed forces over the next 4 years, which suggests the money for the new medium helicopter is not there. This raises quite a few questions, so the Minister, sorry in advance, please grab your pen and your paper, and I'm going to ask you a few questions. I won't bother asking when we will get an announcement on new medium helicopter, because we all know the answer will be wait for the DIP. But if the Minister would like to show me up on this point, please do. Firstly, the Chief of Defence Staff told my honourable friend from North Devon at the committee hearing that while the new medium helicopter is not at the bottom of the investment list, how high up will it be is ultimately a matter for ministers. So can the Minister tell us how much of a priority the new medium helicopter is compared to other programmes his department is considering? Secondly, if the new medium helicopter is a priority, then we can only assure that the problem is the money. Which begs the question, why did the government press ahead with the tender as it was? If they knew Leonardo was the only bidder and the money was probably not there, because £1 billion is not the kind of money you lose down the back of your sofa, is it? That leads me on to what my constituency really want to know. What is going on now to solve this? Is his department committed to making sure this deal does not time out? I know he cannot comment on the endless rumours about who is causing the delays in the DIP, but can he tell us how many conversations he's had in recent months with colleagues from Number 10 and, importantly, the Treasury on the DIP and the future of new medium helicopter? Can he also tell us, yes or no, if his department has had any discussions with government and with Leonardo on how changes to the scale or timeline of new medium helicopter programme could make it workable? If the Minister cannot answer that, will he at least consider Liberal Democrats called for issuing defence bonds. This could raise up to £20 billion for capital spending on defence over the next 2 years. Does he also recognise that the MOD could make greater savings through improving its counter-fraud work? Between 21-22 and 23-24, the MOD was only getting a return of 48 pence for every £1 spent, when public bodies should save £3 for every £1 spent on counter-fraud. Surely that is money we are losing that could be going into funding programmes like New Medium Helicopter. Finally, can the Minister tell us what he is doing to manage the fallout from all of this uncertainty? Importantly, can the Minister clarify the steps his government will take to protect the factory site and jobs in Yeovil and the South West? And can he also tell us what steps he is taking to reassure businesses and international partners that the government is doing all it can to put increased defence spending to work in our fantastic factories? Because I'm really worried that the government's inability to get a contract agreed that only has one bidder has undermined confidence in that. So, Dr. Alan Khan, I hope the Minister can properly answer my questions, because we need clarity on the future of New Medium Helicopter. The programme is good for the future of our armed forces and good for Yeovil and the South West. And if the Minister did need more motivation, I will finally stop annoying him about New Medium Helicopter contract. That alone has got to be worth it. That's one headache off his books. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Dr. Alan Khan. Good to see you in your place there. Can I thank the member for Yeovil for scheduling this debate? I'm afraid he will know some of the answers to his questions because he's asked me them before, and I will give him broadly similar answers as he's had before in relation to his challenge of I'll try not to do it and show him up on the questions that I've already answered previously, but I appreciate the passion that he has on this one here, and can I commend his Westland Helicopters tie that I've spotted him wearing. We do seem to be very much a Putin-esque style table in this debate, with one person down the far end than the other, but I think we have more in common on this, as he knows from our conversations privately. I welcome this opportunity to talk about the contribution that Leonardo UK makes to our armed forces and our economy, especially at a time where we're reassessing every pound of defence spending and defence investment that we are making. Our intention is very clear, as we set out in the Strategic Defence Review and the Defence Investment Plan. We need to fundamentally rewire defence, building stronger, more lethal military, which can deter and, if necessary, defeat those that threaten us. As such, we are looking at the whole programme of defence spending. So let me get straight to the point of the issue he raised. I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman won't be surprised when I say that I can't announce a decision on New Medium Helicopter today, but I can assure him that we will announce a decision as soon as possible as part of the Defence Investment Plan. I'm acutely aware that the contract decision is of great consequence, not just to Leonardo, its workforce at Yeovil, but the wider community. And as a fellow South West MP, I can assure him that that's not lost on me about the importance to the wider region. I also want to remind him that I committed in the main chamber when we discussed this a few times ago that we committed that we will not allow the decision to time out. So he's right that the best and final offer price has a date where it expires. We've committed as a government that we will not time out, i.e. it won't simply fail at that point. We will make a decision ahead of that period as part of the work that we're making on the Defence Investment Plan. Yeah, sure.
I thank the Minister for reiterating that point. My concern is we haven't got a date for when the DIP will come out, and as you've said that the New Medium Helicopter will be in the DIP, so are you saying there that if the DIP isn't out by the end of March, you will make a decision out of the DIP on the New Medium Helicopter?
I've been pretty clear on a number of occasions in the comments and so far that we're not letting the decision time out. And so therefore a decision will be made and we will not let it time out. I think that's consistent with where I've been before. Always happy to give way to my friend.
Thank you for giving way. It's really an important programme, this, and I see that the official opposition have not even bothered to turn up to this debate. But regarding the DIP, I asked the Defence Secretary and he told me it would be out by the end of December. Now it's going to be March. Can you guarantee that it will be March, or what is the hold-up? Is it Treasury talking to MOD and not agreeing the the finances. Could you just be honest and let us know what is the delay in getting the DIP out?
So, as a department, we're working flat out to deliver the DIP. It remains one of our key actions that we're trying to deliver as a department. I would prefer, as a Defence Minister, to get it right than to get it done quickly, where decisions may not be as comprehensive or as clear as we would like it to be. We've committed that we will get it out as soon as we can. And I've also said a number of times that we won't let this decision on new medium helicopter time out. But in the spirit of commenting on ties, it's good to see the honourable gentleman wearing an RCDS tie. And as a fine graduate of the Royal College of Defence Studies, I know he is as well. It's good to see that there. What I want to briefly set out now is the engagement that we're having with Leonardo, because I think it's important that we tell the story about what is taking place while we are looking at new medium helicopter in relation to the wider programme of record that we inherited. So we've been engaging closely with the management team at Leonardo, both in the UK and in Italy. And throughout, we've stressed that the company remains a vital strategic partner to UK defence. In fact, the Defence Secretary spoke to Leonardo's global chief executive, Robert Cingolani, last week. I continued those discussions in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia this week, where both he and I were at the World Defence Show, where I met with both Roberto, the global CEO of Leonardo, and the managing director of Leonardo's helicopter division, Gian Piero Catilio. Last month, the Secretary of State also visited Leonardo's Radar and Advanced Targeting System Centre in Edinburgh to confirm the award of a £453 million contract to manufacture upgraded and new radars for the Eurofighter Typhoon fleet. That's a huge investment in cutting-edge British technology with Leonardo. That investment will support 400 highly skilled jobs at Leonardo's site in Edinburgh and in Luton, part of a network of 9 main sites that the company operates across the UK, employing more than 8,500 people. And I recognise that the Secretary of State's PPS, the member for Luton South and South Bedfordshire, is behind me, and is indeed at the Leonardo site in her constituency that also benefits from that contract, reinforcing that contracts are not just about the point of manufacture, but also about the supply chain across the entirety of the UK, something that I know has been made in relation to a number of these debates so far. And I think it's important we reflect on the challenges about where we came from to get into government. So we inherited a procurement system that was overcommitted, underfunded, and fundamentally unsuited to the threats that Britain faces today. Reforming, refinancing and restructuring that programme for a new generation of warfare is a challenging task, but a necessary one, and it's one we are tackling methodically and thoroughly. This is the first line-by-line review of defence investment for 18 years, in a period in which armed forces have been increasingly hollowed out, and yet the world has become a far more dangerous place. I'll give away again.
Me that the medium helicopter programme is a chance not just to upgrade an important capability, but to move the service branches onto a common helicopter platform?
The Honourable Gentleman is certainly right that we inherited a situation where across all our forces there are far too many platforms that complicate servicing, operations, interoperability, so the war-fighting effect that they can have, and doesn't create the interchangeability that we're looking to deliver that was set out very clearly in this Strategic Defence Review. And certainly I know he is no longer in his place, but the member for Strangford, who intervened on the member hosting this debate earlier, spoke about the Puma helicopter. The Puma is actually a really good example of a helicopter that on average was between 43 and 50 years old. Now, it's hard to make the case that the Puma helicopter was at the cutting edge of military aviation. It was also an incredibly expensive helicopter to keep up. And as we made decisions about removing old technology and investing in new technology, platforms like Puma were announced that they would be retired. That's the right decision, retiring old equipment, bringing on new equipment. And that is effectively the work that we are trying to do at the moment. So collectively, yes, happy to.
Minister for giving way, and I don't disagree with the points that he's making, and Lord knows I'm quite happy for us to dedicate the rest of the debate to bashing the previous administration for their failures. But he talks about the need to future-proof the decision-making. Part of the problem that we have with defence procurement is that the length of time that it takes to get to, even from a decision to deployment, we end up actually changing the spec of what we're asking, which ends up with the Ajax disaster that we're all looking at. So I wonder if, in the remaining time, the Minister can also speak to what the plans are to speed up defence procurement, to make quicker decisions, both on smart tech and dumb tech, on crude and uncrewed, so that actually we can get to that war footing as quickly as possible.
Needs not worry. I noted his question. I will be coming to it in a moment. But as he's invited me to deal with it now, since the general election, we've signed 1,100 major defence contracts as a government. 84% of those have gone to British companies. Where we do buy from international companies, it is because either the technology is solely available from international supply, it provides a military advantage in a timescale, price point or interoperability function with existing technologies. That is a necessity. But I want to see more of a rising defence budget spent with UK firms. And that includes international firms that are based in the United Kingdom, creating jobs and growth opportunities. Happy giving way.
Yeah, on that point, I thank the Minister for that comment, because that is so important, because actually, as he will know, Leonardo is based in Yeovil, based in the southwest, is the only end-to-end helicopter factory left in the UK. So surely this is definitely a win-win. And I hope when the Minister said earlier on, he won't let the decision time out, that it's going to be a positive decision coming.
I would be surprised if he was advocating for another position on that point there. If I just, at risk of getting an intervention again from the member for West Dorset, if I just finish the point on procurement, in the Defence Industrial Strategy, which is actually quite a good read if he hasn't been through it, we've set out the ambition that was mentioned in the SDR of improving our procurement times. That means large complex programmes that take broadly 5-6 years on average, going to 2 years, 2-year programmes to 1 year, 1-year programmes down to 6 months to a few months. That is a big change in terms of how we procure, and it is a fundamental part of the decisions that will be coming out of the Defence Investment Plan, rather than looking at the procurements that started under the previous government. And the new medium helicopter, as the House will know, began in February 2024, and so once a procurement policy has started, it is best practice to continue it with the rules of the road that were in place at the point where the procurement began, because otherwise it can open up to legal challenge and things. So we continued. So the point the member for Yeovil mentioned about pressing ahead, we pressed ahead with this procurement because it had begun and it was in train, and that was the right thing to do, rather than restarting it, because the sense from industry and from the MOD that restarting it carried greater risk than bringing it to a conclusion. But the framing, the setting, the financial arrangements, the specifications were all set by the previous government in relation to new medium helicopter. I think if I'm just dealing finally with the intervention from member for North Devon before I return to member for Yeovil's points, the challenge about will we always need crewed helicopters is a live one. If we look more broadly at our transition from crewed systems to autonomous systems, the SDR sets out very clearly that at this period in time, what we will invest in as a government is a mix of crewed, uncrewed and autonomous systems with a greater drive to autonomy, which not only increases lethality, increases mass, but also provides jobs and growth opportunities. We know our adversaries are also investing in similar technologies. And so the question about the crewed, uncrewed and autonomous mix is a live one, and that brings on very nicely, I think, to the point that the member for Yeovil mentioned around Proteus, which is a brilliant example, I think, of how investment in new technologies can deliver more change. A good project that was funded by the Ministry of Defence in terms of our work with UK Defence Innovation, delivered by Leonardo, and I think it's a sign of the strong partnership with Leonardo that we collaborated on the Proteus project, experimenting with a future rotary wing uncrewed air system. I have spoken to Leonardo about not naming helicopters after ships we have, and I would like to get to a point where we stop naming things either after bad guys in science fiction movies. The chair will be familiar with Skynet from the Terminator films being our satellite communication systems, nor where we already have an existing name. But the technology, however, is outstanding, and that is an area that I think provides huge growth opportunities for British industry, potentially for Leonardo, subject to the usual competitive tendering processes around Proteus in the future. I think it is a good example of how you can demonstrate an autonomous full-size helicopter, but the mix that we are looking for in the Strategic Defence Review is a mix of crewed, uncrewed and autonomous systems as we move in that direction. And the investment that Leonardo have made in uncrewed and autonomous systems is to be welcomed.
Yeah, on that point, I thank the Minister for that, because one of my questions and concerns, as you know, was the fact that if we don't get the new medium lift and we wanted Leonardo to be a bidder for Proteus, their concern was that their job force may not be there, so Proteus may not come. So I'm glad you said you want a mixture of both, so that does sound promising.
It sets out very clearly in the Strategic Defence Review around the mix that we're looking for, partly because the technology is not currently available. In many cases, it's not an off-the-shelf product that we can simply buy from UK or largely international firms. It is something that requires the innovation that we are looking for. Certainly, the work that we are continuing to do with Leonardo at the moment recognises the opportunities for growth in the defence sector, the importance of sovereign capability, the importance of different military capabilities within our overall force picture. And he will, given the defence knowledge that is in this debate, Dr. Alan Khan, you will appreciate that that there are different priorities and changing priorities, that we are learning the lessons from Ukraine in terms of what capabilities we need. Some of the programmes that we inherited from, I would normally say the party opposite, but the party that was previously in government that's not here today, were unsuitable for modern conflict and unfunded. And a key part of the Defence Investment Plan is making sure that every programme that is in our programme of record is sustainable, is funded, and is something that can exist in reality, not just on PowerPoint. And I think that is a big difference to the approach that we saw from the previous government to the one we're seeing now, because as we move to warfighting readiness, which is my number one mission as a minister, I need to make sure that the equipment that we are purchasing and supporting can provide the deterrent ability that we need to deter aggression, but also the ability to defeat it if required. And that is why we're preferencing battlefield-ready technologies and the technologies that give an increase in lethality. I entirely appreciate the passion that the Honourable Member from Yeovil has for his hometown and the importance of this contract. I will commit to continue having conversations with him and with MPs from the wider region as we continue to have very frequent discussions with our colleagues from Leonardo. Happy to give away just for a finish.
And it sounds like the Minister is wrapping up, and I didn't want to be the only member in this debate that hadn't been complimented on their tie.
I'm afraid I didn't bring my long vision glasses, so I can't spot everyone's tie in this. It's a very nice tie. That's a very nice tie. I think the... as long as it's not about ties, but yes.
Just say, with your points earlier on about funding, is it right then, Minister, to say that a lot of this is tied up with the Treasury, the money not being there from the Treasury at the moment for this contract?
Our Treasury colleagues, unlike in previous governments, are aligned to our defence mission. We have closer working with our Treasury colleagues than I have ever seen before. The close cooperation that we have, both in terms of the preparation of the SDR, the DIS, and the work that we're doing with Treasury colleagues on the DIP, I think is a good example of how actually the MOD can find a close friend in the Treasury with a different approach that will ultimately help support the growing defence budget that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have announced for the Ministry of Defence. There's £5 billion extra in our budget this year, and there's not a single person in uniform that has ever served in our armed forces, with a decade ahead of rising defence spending. What we spend that money on, and importantly how we spend it, is the debate around the Defence Investment Plan. I welcome that debate because more discussion about how we can not over-spec, as the member for West Dorset was suggesting, and then change the specs during procurement is something that we have embraced fully in terms of our defence industrial strategy, learning the lessons from the last government where that was not the case. But as I committed earlier in this debate and previously, we won't let the decision on new medium helicopter time out. We'll continue our conversations with Leonardo, and I'm happy continuing conversations with the Honourable Member in a constructive manner to ensure that all those points that he would need to raise on behalf of his constituents can be taken on board as part of this broader Defence Investment Plan work. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the future of the new medium helicopter programme. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30 this afternoon.